So it wasn't my original intention to do a three-part series on walking our talk in the public forum. As often happens, divine order has prevailed. It began with the lesson on Martin Luther King's vision for the beloved community that was inspired by my visit to Atlanta and the King Center, and followed last week by the rescheduled lesson about the legacy of Mr. Rogers and his vision of creating a neighborhood where we practice loving our neighbors. As I said last week, both King and Rogers dedicated their lives to practicing, modeling, and teaching people how to walk our spiritual talk in the public forum, and challenging the error assumption that politics somehow doesn't belong in church. This coming weekend, I was scheduled to do a workshop on politics in church at our West Central Region key leader training that our whole board was going to attend. But it was also canceled due to the precautions around this current COVID-19 virus situation. My preparations for that workshop, however, served to spark this morning's lesson, Healing the Heart of Democracy, based on the Parker Palmer book of the same title. Its subtitle reveals how aligned this work is with our endeavor to walk our spiritual talk in the forum, as he attempts to inspire the courage to create a politics worthy of the human spirit. Some of you may recall that I did a series on Palmer's book back in 2012. Anybody remember? I found it hard to actually take in that we considered our nation dangerously fractured back in 2012, considering where we are today. It seems that we may not have hit bottom yet. But gratefully, what we know here is that from chaos comes transformation. So I look back over those lessons as I prepared for today, and not surprisingly, a lot of them remain relevant. But the good news is, even as appearances have continued to seemingly descend into even greater division and divisiveness, I can affirm that there's also a growing appetite for unity, and perhaps even more importantly, an increasing awareness about what we must do and be to achieve it. I also came across a joke that I told back then, and it's worth repeating, as I remember that to walk this path humbly with our God. It went something like this. A boy was watching his mother, a minister, write her Sunday lesson for church. Of course, I changed that from father to mother for obvious reasons. And the little boy said, "So how do you know what to say?" The mother minister considered for a moment and then said, "Well, I pray and I meditate and I listen for what God wants me to say." To which her son replied, "But then why do you keep crossing things out?" Which is to say that, as usual, I'm teaching what I most need to learn. In those 2012 lessons, I was acknowledging that exploring how spirituality was relevant to politics and vice versa was a shift from what had been our normal focus, largely being about shifting our focus of attention from the outer world of appearances and materialism to that inner world of spirit. Now I realize it was actually a different kind of shift, because unity has always taught that creation is an outward expression of the divine, and that by living spiritual principles, we can both raise our consciousness and transform our lives in the outer. That means that the shift wasn't so much from the inner to the outer, because we already embraced that. It was actually more about moving from an individual perspective to a collective one. Or put another way, from the personal realm to the public realm. And it actually makes a lot of sense as I thought about it, because this journey has always been about realizing our oneness with God and with all of creation. The first part of that journey, at least in my case, was all about experiencing my threefold, infinite, intimate, inner connection with God, ultimately revealing our own spiritual identity and our divine potential. Once that was significantly realized, we're then called, I believe, to engage the more challenging prospect, at least again for me, of recognizing our oneness with all of creation, in essence, with each other, with every other being on the planet, and with the planet itself. Which explains why walking my spiritual talk in the public forum has become my growing spiritual edge. Our edge is where our heart meets our fear, and where we have a choice. We can hesitate, or we can advance in spite of the fear. And advancing is where all of our spiritual growth happens. Sometimes we take a leap of faith, as I remember doing when Rory and I quit our jobs and moved across country to Missouri to become Unity ministers. But more often, it involves incremental steps, moving beyond our comfort zone, learning and trying something new, facing the fears and anxieties that come with that with an open heart and a willing heart. In essence, saying yes, and ultimately expanding rather than contracting our spiritual practice. Living our edge is breathing ourselves deeply through each challenge and opening our hearts a little more once we get to the other side. It's what I experienced when I first spoke at a CHUTZPAH public forum. If you recall the big assembly we had, I was one of the whatever you want to call them, leaders of the thing, but I had to get up in front of this whole group. Now, I do that in spiritual settings all the time, but to do that in a public political setting was something very new. Now that's getting more comfortable, as I did it a couple of weeks ago at the candidates forum. But of course, now there's a new challenge. Now I'm being called over my edge once again to step into fundraising. And all of you know that's not one of my easiest areas. Specifically, walking my spiritual talk in the public forum has involved learning a new way of doing politics. Rather than consuming politics, it's about moving beyond watching the dysfunctional partisan hype to actually engage in building public relationships with people and institutions that were previously outside of my affinity circles. In essence, other churches, labor unions, nonprofit organizations, through which we then collectively identify common issues, develop practical strategies that actually improve lives in our communities, and ultimately exercise political power to help make them happen. That's what I now realize is love in action, especially as we adhere to our spiritual values in the process. For me, this shift to public relationships parallels the expansion from loving our partners, friends, and families to embracing agape, the universal love and compassion that Jesus and other masters teach and model, and that elevates the common good into its proper balance with our individual desires. So in his endeavor to help create a politics worthy of the human spirit, Parker Palmer brings to our discussion and practice his 5 habits of the heart. He describes them as a blend of humility and chutzpah. You'll see that, a little bit of that explanation in your handout. I tend to equate these habits to being spiritually awake within this very worldly environment of human politics. In essence, living from the awareness of our intrinsic interconnection and interdependency, in essence, our oneness with all people and all of creation. So let's take a look at these habits one by one. The first is an understanding that we're all in this together. Biologists and ecologists, economists and ethicists, and leaders of great wisdom traditions have all given voice to this theme. They've been telling us we're all in this together for eons. Despite our illusions of individualism and national superiority, we humans are a profoundly interconnected species, entwined with one another and with all forms of life, as the global economic, ecological crises are revealing in our times in vivid and frightening detail. And what I'm learning is there's no better way for this realization to emerge than by engaging in public life with mindful intention. In essence, where strangers meet on common ground, think cafes, concerts, farmers markets, churches, adult education classes. There's a multitude of ways that we meet in public life, where our lives expand in color, texture, flair, drama, and humor, where we're drawn outside of ourselves, where needs become evident and common concerns are identified so that mutual aid can become possible, where ideas and resources can be shared and generated, differences debated, and conflicts negotiated, and where, in the company of strangers, we discover that our differences are actually often enriching, and even those that can be vexing can be negotiated, and in fact that we can do business together even in the face of conflicting interests. It's from this shared vantage point, and often against the backdrop of the political or identifies as the increasingly concentrated and almost impenetrable structure of political financial power in our world, that we realize we're all in this together. In fact, we realize that coming together may be the only thing that can or will change things. The second habit is an appreciation of the value of otherness. Because to fully embrace this idea that we're all in this together requires that we rethink how we spend most of our lives in tribes or lifestyle enclaves or silos, as they call it, where the world gets defined in terms of us and them. It's the duality trap that's one of our ego-run mind's most vexing limitations. But we can rise above this error ego perspective by bringing our spiritual awareness and realize that us and them doesn't have to mean us versus them. Rather, it can remind us of the ancient wisdom traditions of welcoming the stranger and help us adopt a 21st century version of that practice. Hospitality was always premised on the notion that the stranger had much to teach us. Applied today, it should inspire us to actively invite expanding forms of otherness into our daily lives, specifically people with ideas, experiences, and perspectives that are different from our own. We cannot fully embrace deep hospitality or radical inclusivity, however, if we don't also recognize the creative possibilities that are inherent in these differences. And that brings us to the third habit of the heart, which is an ability to hold tension in life-giving ways. Our lives are filled with inner and outer contradictions, both apparent and real. For example, our own behavior can sometimes belie our aspirations, and the world around us often seems to deny what we value or believe to be true. When we're unable to hold these contradictions creatively, they can literally shut us down, leaving us seemingly with only lose-lose options and no way forward. Anybody ever remember feeling like you were boxed in, like whatever choice you made, there was going to be something that you lost and you just felt stuck? It can literally paralyze us. But when we learn to hold such tensions and allow them to expand our minds and hearts, when we just rest for a moment, allowing them to just be, and trust that there are both end perspectives that we simply have not yet realized, our imaginations are set free to reveal previously unimaginable possibilities, as well as deeper understandings of ourselves and our world. How many of you have, once you sat in that box and felt that frustration, if you could just be patient and wait, found that it resolved itself? The reality is, things come together to resolve themselves. Consider, for example, the difference between being stuck in a right-wrong argument. Anybody ever done that?
Never.
And stopping to imagine why the other person might be thinking, feeling, or acting as they are. Such a pause might even cause one to actually ask them with sincere curiosity to share their perspective. And as they share, rather than resist and push back, open yourself a little more and say, tell me more about that, with a sincere desire to understand. The truth is, we're all limited beings with finite perspectives, and understanding that it's always partial and in need of correction or expansion. There's always more to learn. And the genius of the human heart lies in its capacity to use these tensions that feel uncomfortable, but that are so central to life, that they come with our very limitations, and they generate insights, energy, and new possibilities by us walking through them. In essence, they create new life. Making the most of these gifts, however, requires the fourth habit of heart, which is a sense of personal voice and agency. These insights and energies that we get when we've struggled with conflicting ideas and been able to hold that space to develop a new perspective, what I like to call a both-and perspective that rises above what seemed to be either or, gives rise to new life as we speak and act out our own version of truth, while continually checking and correcting it against the truths of others. But when we lack confidence in our own voice or in our power or ability to make a difference, we often forfeit that power. If we've been raised in families and our educational and religious institutions that taught us to be the audience rather than the actors in life's drama, and in essence believing that life happens to us rather than through us, we will likely treat politics as a spectator sport as well. Which is why organizations like CHUTZPAH can be so transformative. They help us all, young and old, rich and poor, formally educated and wise from life, and learn how to use them effectively. And allow us to experience firsthand the satisfaction that comes from both caring and then contributing to positive change through the power of community. Us to the fifth and final habit of heart, a capacity to create community. Without a community, it's nearly impossible to achieve voice. It takes a village parks. Without a community, it's impossible to exercise the power in a way that allows power to multiply. It took a village to translate Park's act of personal integrity into social change. In a mass society like ours, communities rarely come ready-made. And creating community in the places where we live and work does not mean abandoning other parts of our lives to become require the community of Monterey Bay to support and encourage us in developing public as well as relationships. And I can attest to how motivating the steady companionship of 2 or 3 kindred spirits, like our Unity CHUTZPAH team, has helped us each find the courage and commitment we need to speak and act as citizens and show up in mass, like we all do. 30 people from our community show up at these public functions. How many of you had ever been to a political function besides voting or a march?
So today is a powerful day at Unity of Monterey Bay. I think you can all feel the love. And so we're going to take advantage of that love and direct it in some healing ways for our planet. So I invite you now to just relax. Deep breaths together. So breathing in, holding for just a moment, and then releasing slowly. And again, breathing in deeply, filling up the chest and lungs with air, holding for just a moment, and exhaling slowly, experiencing that release and that sense of relaxation, bringing our awareness into the present moment. So Vicky talked about the heart today, and the heart, a whole wisdom and power of its own. So we're going to take a few moments to bring our awareness to that heart space this morning so that we can then direct that energy. I invite you now to bring your awareness to the heart and continue to breathe slowly and deeply. That's comfortable. And just allow outer distractions to fade away as you bring that awareness right to that center of your being, to that loving heart. We continue to activate the heart's own wisdom and power by breathing into the heart. So I invite you now to imagine that you're just that loved one or that beloved place, to just bring that feeling of appreciation to your heart. You might even find yourself beginning to have a small smile on your face as you recall the joy. Imagine that heart energy blessing those in your life, your family and friends, loved ones, neighbors, co-workers. See it steadily expanding out to encompass our state. And then sending it to the whole country. Continuing to breathe in and out of the heart space. Keeping that awareness and that smile as if there were a smile spreading through your heart. I invite you now to direct in a focused way that loving energy to our government, to our Congress, to our senators, to all of the presidential candidates. Now take a deep breath with me. And we're going to send that loving energy right to the top, to our president. To all those that surround our president. To all those making decisions in our country. To all those involved in local government. To all the voters, the organizers,